Morning, everyone. My name is Tahir Duckett, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Innovations in Community Safety at Georgetown Law, where we work alongside municipal policymakers to advance cutting-edge, effective breakthroughs in community safety. Thank you for all being here this morning. I'm really, really always grateful for folks who take an interest in this work. Over the past several months, and with the support of the Diane and Norman Bernstein Foundation, we have engaged with over 100 stakeholders, community members, people with lived experience, and other experts in Washington about the district's community safety efforts. We learned that, much like other jurisdictions around the nation, DC has primarily relied on police to respond to calls involving behavioral health crisis, substance use, and poverty. It's an approach that has drained police resources while failing to provide individuals in crisis the specialized help that they need. But fortunately, there is another way. Today, we and our partners are releasing Our Neighborhoods, Our Safety, a blueprint for a unified public health approach to community safety in Washington, D.C. It provides a path towards sending the right response to the right call for help in the district. Now, we don't have to invent the wheel here. Jurisdictions like Albuquerque, New Mexico, Denver, Colorado, Durham, North Carolina, and Harris County, Texas, have collectively diverted hundreds of thousands of 911 calls away from police to train health professionals in recent years. And they've done it by spending no more money than the district is spending right now on its community response teams. For example, in FY26, the district spent $11.3 million on community response to respond to 4,200 calls. Compare that to the city of Durham, which spent $7.5 million to respond to over 14,000 calls for help. Now, we are joined here today by Harris County, Texas Commissioner Rodney Ellis, Assistant Chief Saul Suarez from the Harris County Sheriff's Office, and former Denver Police Chief Paul Pazin, each of whom have seen how this approach has worked in other major cities. And so I am honored to have these incredibly smart professionals here with me, and I will happily pass the mic over to Assistant Chief Saul Suarez.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Executive Director Duckett, for allowing us to participate in this press conference. For myself, it's an honor, but also just want to on behalf of Sheriff Ed Gonzalez and the men and women of the Harris County Sheriff's Office, want to just tell you thank you also for giving us an opportunity to showcase some of the hard work that's being done here by our alternative response team that's assigned to our public health department, which will be our holistic assistance response team, which stands for HART. So it was launched in March of 2022. So it's been about 4 years, and it was launched in a way for us to get an opportunity to deflect a lot of this the calls that are being assigned to public servants in an effort to free them to be responsible for more of the emergency calls. So some of the data, we've been looking at the data, and for us, it's been pretty effective because we started with 2 districts. We have 6 districts, and now we've expanded to all 6 patrol districts. But the top 10 calls so far this year that come in, and we average about 1 million calls per year. So far this year, 5 of those top 10 calls are some of the highest priority calls for our HART team. And some of those calls are like welfare checks, suspicious persons, information calls, meet the citizens, and loud noise disturbances. So for us, it's important to leverage technology, but also finding a compassionate way for people to respond to calls that, in our perspective, law enforcement should not be responding to. And it's been very successful, but also our main objective is to deflect, but also to divert, because when you're talking about and also decrease our jail population. And when you're talking about the Harris County Jail here in Houston, Texas, we're the largest in Texas. We have close to 9,000 inmates at the moment. So our main objective is not to bring more people to jail, so to speak. So HART has been an excellent partner for us. Not only did they respond to those calls, and they're pretty effective. I'll give an example here in a second, but also like during natural disasters, during like winter storms here recently in January, we had a winter storm, and HART was out there with our unhoused individuals, finding warming shelters for them, providing transportations, and also when you're talking about strengthening our community support and also our relationships, HART's out there doing National Night Out. They're also out there on community events. So I think it's a very, very great partnership. We've also prioritized our relationships with them. We have like a bi-weekly meeting with their top leadership. And the reason we do that is because we know it's hard to change the culture, right? So we have to have those conversations every 2 weeks or so to address a lot of the issues that might arise on both sides. But also, how do we get better? How do we train both our teammates on the law enforcement side to understand that HART's here to support us and be that great support mechanism that we need to attack public safety. But also, I wanted to provide an example that we had recently that HART assisted with. It was a welfare check. It was two children that they just flagged somebody down on the street, and they wanted some help. They wanted some help with their parents, and HART responded to that. And it turned out it was they were going through a financial crisis, and they needed support. And HART was able to provide that. They provided that emotional support, but also a lasting support mechanism where they were able to secure a stable employment for the parent and still continue to have that relationship with those children after the fact. So that's just one example of how the alternative response works and how we're very excited to continue to work and strengthen our relationships with HART and find more ways to divert more calls in addition to the already top 5 of the top 10 calls that we've had so far this year.
Great. Thank you, Assistant Chief Suarez. I believe we've just had Rodney Ellis join us. Basuki, can we get him promoted to the panel list? Maybe not. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Commissioner Ellis, so you here with us?
I am good to be with you. Sorry we had a mishap there on getting me on the panel.
No worries, no worries. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you speak for a few minutes about HART from your perspective as a political leader in Harris County, Texas?
Well, what we did after the George Floyd protest, back on the day after his funeral, was come up with a list of items we'd like to try to put in place to improve our ability to serve our citizens in the law enforcement area. And one of the things we found was that we were just asking law enforcement to do too many things. So no matter what it is, the first thing you do is call law enforcement. And HART was one of the more effective ideas that we came up with. It's not a new concept. Other places around the country were doing it. And so we decided we would try as a pilot program. And it's been tremendously successful. I think that Chief Suarez may have run through some of the statistics, about 27,000 calls since it was launched. They connected with over 4,400 residents to follow up on support services. We prevented law enforcement from having to go in and deal with a lot of instances where you really needed someone to de-escalate what was going on. Instead of law enforcement, you needed a trained professional to sort it out. So it saved law enforcement time. It's given them the ability to focus more on the issues that only they can handle and let these other issues be handled by professionals in that area. So it's been very successful for us. We decided that we would keep it. It was a pilot initially. And now we have decided to have a full-blown program. And I'm going to work with my colleagues to expand it as much as we can.
Thank you, Commissioner Ellis. And we also have former Chief Paul Pazin with us from Denver, Colorado. So it's not just Harris County, Texas, where this has worked. Y'all in Denver County, in Denver, Colorado, have had the really successful STAR program as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I will. Thank you very much, Executive Director. It's an honor to be here. I just want to go back in time a little bit. We recognized pretty early on that we needed to find some better outcomes for individuals in crisis. We had one particular neighborhood that had the highest rates of mental health challenges and was the highest rates of poverty in the state of Colorado. So way back in 2014, we started looking at different approaches to include community response to individuals with mental health challenges and family support. This was one step that led us towards a co-responder model that we piloted in the city to see how that would work. At the same time, we were building this alternative response model. So 2014 was the grant. 2016, we started with co-responders. 2018, we started talking about creating what ultimately became the STAR program with alternative response. We implemented STAR. Our first call for service was June 1 of 2020. That was right in the middle of the George Floyd protests that we were dealing with. It took a couple of years of ramp up, but we were the first major city to look at alternative response from a different lens. I also want to point out that although alternative response is what we're talking about here today, it's very important that we also look at the downstream impacts. If Paul is in crisis and the STAR van shows up and helps me, that is great. We can de-escalate the situation and get the assistance necessary. But what about tomorrow? What about next week? What about next month? And what we did was we created a continuum of crisis care that included alternative response, the STAR van for low-level individuals in mental health crisis, as well as maintaining the expanded co-responder program for individuals who may be violent or armed with weapons, and then also outreach case coordinators, the people that do the follow-up. So a warm handoff when somebody's in crisis that's interacting with either STAR or co-responders. So that way we're not going to the same location, or we're not having to handle the same situation with a person over and over again, that we're coming up with long-term solutions. We also built out community locations where we can provide assistance and take people to. So it's important that although we're talking about alternative response, that we look at that holistic picture and what do we do after we de-escalate the situation. It's been very successful in Denver. We similarly did a pilot program, and after the first 6 months recognized that this was the way to go. And now we have STAR vans in all 6 districts, nearly 24 hours a day coverage, but we do have coverage with a mental health professional 7 days a week, 24 hours a day throughout the entire city. This our model has been studied by outside groups to include Stanford University, and it certainly helps get better outcomes for individuals in crisis, and that was our overall goal. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I just wanted to ask, one of the first things that I often get asked when I'm talking about this work with people is it safe? Could we possibly send unarmed responders to respond to calls where folks are in mental or behavioral health crisis? And I was just wondering if any of you wanted to speak to how you've seen safety concerns resolved within your jurisdictions.
Even though I spoke last, I don't mind jumping in here. When we were developing STAR, I told you that it was a 2-year process beginning back in 2018. We actually had our dispatch team as folks that went and were critical in all of the meetings that we went to. The most important part of this is a decision tree. When somebody, back then, 988 didn't exist. We did this when the 911 system was the only number that you had. We recognized that it would have been better to have a separate number, and we actually created a separate number 720-913 initially until the 988 rollout. But that decision tree is critical, and call takers and dispatchers asking the right questions. If the individual is in crisis, are they violent or are they armed with a weapon? And we definitely do not want to send unarmed mental health professionals to a dangerous situation. And that's why we had that layered approach with if somebody's violent or armed with a weapon, we still send a mental health professional. They are a co-responder in order to ensure safety with the individual that they're dealing with.
Assistant Chief Suarez? Yeah. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, so for us, we pre-screen the calls. So we have our emergency dispatch center, our dispatchers in constant communication with the HART team. They're able to also take calls off the screen. However, if they do encounter a call where it might escalate to a situation where they might need law enforcement, fire, EMS, we'll also have a good working relationship. Like I mentioned earlier, we have our patrol captains that are in constant communication with the leadership of HART to ensure there's any issues that might arise. But also, we're able to respond right away. And we do track those numbers. And the last quarter, I think it was about 3% of the calls that HART responded to, that from those calls they were able to call for police, fire, EMS to provide assistance. So we do have those conversations. When it comes to mental health, we're also in those biweekly supervisor meetings. We also have our behavioral health team, our crisis intervention teams, to be able to provide that additional feedback when it comes to dealing with somebody that might need an emergency detention order or something like that. So we're always aligned with that constant communication. I think that helps because you do see issues that might arise from call to call. It might be specific for one call, one specific person. We're able to address that right away, and that's been very successful for us.
I would just echo their thoughts. In Harris County, Houston, obviously, we benefited a lot to hear from the work, the consulting advisory work you all gave us. We also benefited from what was happening in Denver, since they were a pioneer in this space. Anytime we talk about a mental health issue, obviously things can change quickly, but that's why training on the front end is so important, so that those professionals who are taking those calls can make a judgment. If something changes, you just have to adjust with it. We've been lucky so far. Most programs around the country have been fairly lucky as well, but that luck comes from having trained, experienced professionals who learn with every call and get better the longer we have these programs.
Thank you all. I really appreciate that. And it's something that we've seen echoed nationwide, right? That in most jurisdictions that are doing this work, you see a really, really low number of needed calls for backup, but they've got the option to do so if they need to. And I think that really, really matters. This is a real moment of opportunity here in the district. We have new leadership incoming at the council and in the mayor's office, and it's a real opportunity to set the direction for public safety moving forward. And so, the full blueprint is available on our website. We'll circulate it via email after this event. If you've got questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll read them aloud for our guests. In the meantime, you'll also be able to follow our work on Instagram at CICS Georgetown Law or on LinkedIn. And if we don't have questions in the chat, I have just one more follow-up, and maybe I'll send it over to you, Commissioner Ellis. Jurisdictions around the country right now are struggling with budget. Most jurisdictions we see are in the midst of something of a budget crunch, and the district is no different. And so, when you were looking at your budget in Harris County, Texas, is HART something that remains a priority, even while you're seeing the need to really pinch pennies, as it were.
We found that these programs have had a good return on the investment. It's important for us that law enforcement, our sheriff, Assistant Chief Suarez, and his team have been the biggest supporters, and it means a lot. The most expensive thing I found from my years in government that you can end up having to invest in is law enforcement because people are putting their lives on the line. So you got to have these programs working in tandem. At the end of the day, most people want to call law enforcement for whatever it is because we looked at them to solve every problem. But when it's a mental health issue, if it's a welfare check call, there are things that law enforcement should not be expected to do. Now, if it's a violent situation, don't call the other folks in. That's when you need law enforcement. But don't ask them to do everything. And so when they work in tandem, it works well. It's been a good investment on our part. Now, politically, it took some effort to convince people of that. But once we did it as a pilot program and people see that it's working, it has good broad-based support.
I want to just echo Commissioner Ellis just mentioned. I want to also thank him and his support also for hard and for law enforcement. But I think like you touched on it, sir, like I think sometimes the perception is like the fear of monies being taken away from law enforcement, right? Because it's being issued to alternative response systems. But I think like it starts also with the organization, with the sheriff's office having leadership, top leadership, having that buy-in, and we're able to influence our teammates for them to understand like this is something good for all of us, but also for the community. Because when you do have that behavioral health support and trained individuals coming out dealing with persons with crisis, a lot of times law enforcement should not be the first choice. So I feel like it starts with collaborative efforts, but also having that buy-in from top leadership to help implement this.
Wonderful. And while we're talking about Harris County, would you be able to are you able to get to all of the eligible heart calls, or would they be able to respond to even more calls if they had additional resources?
If they had more resources, they could clearly get to more calls. But you have to start somewhere. And obviously, there are always budgetary issues. But as long as they work in tandem, make sure that you make the investment in boots on the ground. But when you have programs like this, it gives us more resources that we can put in the boots on the ground because they're not spending time on things that they should not be doing.
Great. This question maybe for all three of you. What groups have been most resistant to this shift? Has it been the public? Has it been law enforcement officers, elected officials, someone else?
For us early on in Houston, Harris County, it was some of the elected officials because it was trying something different. And I've been in office for a very long time, back when I was on the Houston City Council. Anytime you're trying something new, people will question it. And that's a good thing. In the legislature, sometimes, people would fall on partisan traditional lines. And then when you can bring a few over and get some support, it makes sense. I think the key is to get law enforcement buy-in. It was a special moment after the George Floyd controversy came around, and people were willing to look inward and say, what can we do different? And I think that gave us a moment, and we were fortunate enough to get some buy-in, and it's working.
Yeah, Chief Payson, what about in Denver?
Well, I'll echo many of those same thoughts. We were very fortunate, as I indicated. This was a long runway. We started in 2014, and so the law enforcement aspect actually had pretty good buy-in because we had been working with co-responders for several years and seen the effectiveness of that partnership. So and the general public took to it right away. When you explain to community members that we're going to take this approach that is focused on better outcomes for individuals in crisis, they generally buy in pretty quick. This is probably not a popular answer, but the most resistance that we saw was when we had different competing groups that wanted, as we said, this is resources and there's money attached to those resources. And we had different groups that wanted to take control and ultimately utilize some of the money that we were setting aside for this. So it was a little bit of a challenge to navigate different groups that might have had different agendas. And I know that this has hurt other attempts across the country in both Oakland and San Francisco, or Portland and Oakland. They had some challenges similar to ours, but fortunately we were able to point to that North Star of better outcomes for individuals in crisis, get the pilot launched, show the success with the data, and then move it forward from there.
Really helpful. And I'll stick with you, Chief Payson, before we see if anybody else wants to jump in. You know, we've talked a lot today about mental health and behavioral health crisis calls. Um, are there other kinds of calls that fall into the bucket of, you know, maybe we don't actually need a law enforcement response here, or maybe law enforcement wouldn't be the best response that you think others could handle, to try to help alleviate the burden on police?
So the primary focus is certainly the mental health calls. We want to make sure that we have the right resource going and helping individuals who happen to be in crisis, the best trained, the most equipped individuals to de-escalate those situations. Yes, there are additional low-level calls, unwanted persons, individuals that are not displaying violent behavior or unarmed. One of the things that we noticed early on in our first year of operation is 31% of all STAR calls were actually generated by police officers. So if a police officer during their proactive time came across an individual that could use some assistance, the officers themselves would call dispatch and say, hey, can you have the STAR van swing by my location to help an individual? So it's one of those positive signs that we see that is very helpful.
Yeah, I think a real strong indicator of how the program got socialized within the Denver Police Department, as well as its efficacy. Because I think all of y'all would probably agree with this. Police aren't going to call somebody who's not going to be helpful in those kinds of situations. Assistant Chief Suarez, what did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say it's always important to look at other opportunities to divert a lot of the calls for service that we believe that law enforcement shouldn't be responding to. But for me, just two that come to mind right away are like non-fatal overdoses. That would be one, and then also like dealing with like criminal trespasses, but someone that's outside of a building, right? They're not technically inside the building trespassing. I think that those are opportunities for us to send our heart team and to be able to have that lasting support mechanism to provide some type of support where they don't continue to do those type of behaviors. So those are definitely two that come to mind. But obviously there's more. And I think like just us having that communication with our heart team, that leadership, bi-weekly constant communication helps us. We're staying relentless. But also earlier you touched on any issues that might arise. I think for us, it's how do you change the culture, right? So we've started to implement like the heart teams with our basic peace officer training at the academy, also with our laterals, deputies that are coming over, and then also our jail staff, because I think it's important to get it out there, to get that message out there that we do have this alternative response system, and what other areas can we leverage as we continue to grow this team.
I think a lot about those neighborhood disputes. All of us have been ingrained to whenever you have a problem, you call law enforcement. On the other side, some people, they have it ingrained in them to just call an elected official, no matter what it is. And it's always hard for us to say, we were elected as your representative, not your savior. We can't do it all. But, of course, when we campaign, we say, whatever it is, we can do it. But look, in most cities and counties around the country, the county or city jail, whichever may be the case, is the largest mental health entity in that jurisdiction, unfortunately. We tend to lock them up because we as a society don't want to invest the money in something else. So we put them in jail. So that's why disproportionate of them tend to be mental health issues. And After the pandemic and a host of things, we all know mental health issues are just off the chain, just unprecedented around the globe, unprecedented challenges in that space. And it's just not fair to expect law enforcement to have to become the therapist on every dispute that comes up. If it's a violent one, we have to go to them. So we want to free them up so they can handle those things that save lives, avoid bodily injury, but not those things when somebody is just having a bad day. Now, when it erupts to something that's a bad tragedy, that's when you need law enforcement.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And we've seen in certain jurisdictions across the country, they've started to add mediation into some of the things that you see some of these crisis responders or community responders doing because yeah, sometimes these neighborhood disputes, these low-level disputes, it might call constituent services, they might call 911, they might call law enforcement, and really they just need somebody to come in, be a listener, be somebody who can, maybe help de-escalate a situation, ideally before it turns into something worse. Um, well, I want to thank all three of you for being incredible leaders on this important issue, and especially if you don't mind, Commissioner Ellis, especially to the Assistant Chief Suarez and to Chief Pazin, to see law enforcement leaders being leaders on such an important issue that oftentimes folks don't give law enforcement credit for, right? For kind of thinking broadly and thinking innovatively. And so I really, really appreciate that. To all of our guests, again, the full blueprint is available on our website. We'll circulate it via email after the event. And we really appreciate your interest in this work, and we hope that you'll give it a read, and we hope that it's a document that ultimately is helpful in other jurisdictions across the country. This was built and made for DC, but I don't believe that the lessons are only for DC, and I think that's why it's helpful to look to other jurisdictions for advice and for knowledge sharing. So, thanks to all of you one more time, and have really wonderful days.
Thank you. We appreciate Georgetown. Great work.
Thank you, thank you,
All
thank you.
right. Thank you.